This is Dr. Panda.
Some men choose to permanently shut down their own desire. Not because they can't get it, but because they don't want to feel it anymore. For them, sex isn't pleasure. It's pressure, responsibility, expectation, performance. And when control becomes exhausting, giving it up feels like freedom. So here's the uncomfortable truth. What if desire isn't power, but a burden? I'm Dr. Panda. Here, we don't react to extremes. We break them down. Why some men want to give up desire. There's a question most people never ask out loud, because even thinking it feels wrong. Why would a man want less desire? Not less sex, not fewer partners, but less wanting altogether. We're taught that desire is power, that wanting more is healthy, natural, masculine, that the problem is never desire itself, only the lack of it. So when you hear that some men actively want to shut it down, reduce it, or escape it entirely, the instinctive reaction is disbelief or judgment. But here's what rarely gets said. For some men, desire doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like pressure. Pressure to perform, pressure to succeed, pressure to want the right things in the right way at the right time. Desire becomes something you're constantly measured against. Not just by others, but by yourself. Are you driven enough? Confident enough? Strong enough? Are you failing if you hesitate? Are you weak if you don't want what you're supposed to want? Over time, wanting stops feeling spontaneous, turns into noise, and noise is exhausting. For some men, desire isn't a spark, it's a demand, a reminder of expectations they never asked for but are still held responsible for. Wanting becomes work. Wanting becomes risk. Wanting becomes another place where failure feels possible. So the idea of giving it up starts to sound less like loss and more like relief. That's the part that makes people uncomfortable, because it challenges a deep assumption that desire is always good, always healthy, always worth protecting. But what if desire, under certain conditions, becomes a burden? What if it's not a source of meaning, but a constant source of anxiety? Think about it. We live in a world that tells men to want endlessly, but gives them very few safe ways to talk about what wanting costs them. Admitting exhaustion sounds like weakness. Admitting fear sounds like failure. So instead, those feelings get rerouted, internalized, turned into silence. And in silence, extreme thoughts don't sound extreme anymore. They sound logical. If something causes stress, you reduce it. If something causes pain, you avoid it. If something controls you, you look for a way out. This isn't about sex. It's about control. Or more accurately, about the desire to escape control. For some men, the fantasy isn't indulgence. It's quiet. It's the absence of constant internal pressure. It's waking up without that pull, that itch, that sense of being driven by something they don't fully understand and never agreed to carry. When desire feels like a leash instead of a choice, cutting it loose starts to feel like freedom. And that raises a disturbing question we rarely confront honestly. What if the thing we call power isn't always empowering? What if wanting, under the wrong conditions, doesn't liberate us but traps us? Before you judge the men who think this way, ask yourself something simpler. Is there anything in your life that once felt like strength, but now just feels heavy? Because for some men, desire is exactly that. And walking away from it doesn't feel like giving up. It feels like breathing for the first time. Control, relief, and the psychology behind it. Let's say the quiet part out loud. This was never really about sex. It's about control. Or more precisely, about the exhausting responsibility of having it. From a young age, men are told that power is their birthright. That leadership, dominance, pursuit, these are natural extensions of masculinity. You're supposed to initiate, supposed to chase, supposed to want, supposed to handle rejection without flinching, supposed to succeed eventually. If you don't, something must be wrong. But here's what rarely gets acknowledged. Holding power isn't just privilege. It's pressure. When you're expected to lead, you're also expected to absorb failure. When you're expected to desire, You're expected to manage the consequences of that desire. Every move carries risk. Every approach carries the possibility of humiliation. Every mistake becomes evidence. So what happens when someone gets tired of being the one who has to act? Tired of initiating? Tired of performing? Tired of pretending they're never afraid? The narrative says real freedom means having options, having access, having the ability to choose. But unlimited choice isn't always liberating. Sometimes it's overwhelming. Psychologists have talked for years about how too many options can paralyze people. The more possibilities you're responsible for, the more ways you can fail. The more you question every decision. The more you wonder whether you should have done something differently. Now apply that to identity. If masculinity is defined by agency, then you're constantly on stage, constantly proving you're decisive, capable, in control. There's no intermission, no safe backstage where you can admit you're exhausted. And here's the twist no one wants to say publicly. Sometimes giving up control feels safer than holding it. Not because someone wants to be powerless, but because power means accountability. It means risk. It means you're the one who has to decide, initiate, perform, sustain. Relinquishing control in certain contexts can feel like relief, like stepping off a treadmill that never slows down, like not having to calculate every move, like not being the one responsible for what happens next. When you look at it that way, the desire to opt out of constant wanting starts to make psychological sense. If desire drives you to act, and action exposes you to judgment, then reducing desire reduces exposure. Less wanting, less risk, less performance anxiety. It becomes a form of self-protection. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. We tend to frame control as inherently good, autonomy as sacred, independence as the highest form of strength. But what if, for someone drowning in expectation, surrendering a piece of that autonomy feels stabilizing? Not dramatic, not eroticized, just stabilizing. There's a reason some people describe structured environments, strict rules, or clearly defined roles as calming. When the boundaries are explicit, the mental load decreases. You're no longer improvising your identity every second. You're no longer carrying the full weight of choice. For a man who feels constantly measured by his ambition, his desire, his initiative, the fantasy of stepping out of that role can feel less like weakness and more like silence after years of noise. The world keeps saying, want more, do more, be more. But what if someone is simply tired? Tired of being evaluated, tired of being compared, tired of pretending that the drive never falters. When you strip away the shock factor, what you're left with isn't perversion. It's fatigue. And fatigue makes people reconsider things they once believed were essential. So before dismissing the impulse to escape desire as irrational, ask a harder question. If you were told your value depended on constant action, would you never, even once, dream of putting that burden down? Because for some men, this isn't about chasing pleasure. It's about finally escaping the pressure to chase it all. When freedom starts to feel like a burden. At this point, it's easy to misunderstand the entire conversation. This isn't about glorifying extremes. It isn't about encouraging anyone to reject their own nature. It's about asking why, in a world obsessed with freedom, so many people quietly fantasize about escape. We talk about choice as if more of it automatically makes us happier. More options, more autonomy, more ways to express ourselves. And in theory, that sounds right. But freedom also means responsibility. If you can choose anything, then every outcome is partly yours. If you want something, you have to pursue it. If you fail, you can't always blame the system. That's heavy. Modern culture tells men they are free to chase, free to build, free to define themselves. But it rarely talks about how exhausting constant self-definition can be. You are not just living your life. You are managing it, branding it, optimizing it, always wanting, always striving, always proving. So when someone says they want less desire, less pressure, less internal noise, maybe the reaction shouldn't be ridicule. Maybe the reaction should be curiosity. because this isn't just about men. It's about anyone who has ever felt overwhelmed by their own supposed freedom. There's a strange paradox here. The more we're told we can be anything, the more terrified we become of being nothing. And sometimes the fantasy of surrender, of stepping out of the race, feels like a way to quiet that fear. Not because ambition is wrong, not because desire is evil, but because carrying them nonstop is exhausting. So here's the real question. In your own life, is there something that once felt empowering, but now just feels heavy? A goal you're chasing because you think you should? A version of yourself you're performing because it's expected? A desire you're afraid to question? What would it mean to examine that honestly? Not to destroy it, not to escape it, but to ask whether it still belongs to you. Maybe real freedom isn't endless wanting. Maybe it's knowing what you no longer need to prove. I'm curious what you think. Is giving something up always weakness? Or can it sometimes be clarity? Tell me where you stand. And that's a wrap for this episode of the video. I'm DR.RED Panda. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Until next time, take care.